Hello there, it's Jan here from JB Crafts. Thank you for joining me today. And if this is your first time visiting, welcome to the channel. I am into my second year on YouTube now, so really enjoying providing the learning experience for you guys. And according to all the comments and things that I receive, I think you're enjoying that journey too. So have something a little bit new today, which is why I haven't got anything on my desk just yet. I've been thinking about this for a while, and this is aimed possibly at more of a beginner crafter, but there's no reason why you can't have a go at this as, you know, a seasoned crafter. It's like, you guys that know me know that I've been crafting for well over 20 years now, and it just sort of focused where I wanted to go with something. So I've just created this on my laptop, and I'm going to bring this in and I'm going to call it the Take 5 Challenge. And I often get messaged about, sort of people sitting down at their craft desk and not quite knowing where to start. And it can be a bit overwhelming sometimes, especially as I think a lot of you are in the same boat as me, where we just buy things, and we're surrounded by all these beautiful products. And then it's like, well, what do I actually do with them? We've got so much stuff that sometimes, and I get this occasionally, I think, where do I start today? What shall I actually do? And sometimes it's something that I've seen that I've taken inspiration from. It might be a particular paper. In this case, the project today was definitely the pattern paper that led the way for the rest of the design. And I'll talk about that in a second. But what I've done, take 5, as in take 5 elements for your project, whether it be a card design. We could transfer this into scrapbooking, into journaling, into mixed media, into album making, all the different paper crafting that we love to do, home decor, things like that. It's a very simple way of looking at what do I need to include in a very basic design to create something, that I'm happy with at the end. So I've just put my title at the top here that I've chosen a fairy design today, and that was all because of the pattern paper. So the first thing I wanted to think about was the background. Now, I haven't included the base card stock in the 5 items because we always need some kind of card to get us going if we're a card maker, or, a background for a scrapbooking page, so on and so on. So I've chosen a DL design, size today, and I'll talk again about that in a little while when we get into the tutorial. First thing I wanted to do was look at a background, and I thought, right, where shall we go today? What haven't we used for a while? And because I was going to make the DL size, which I know is an 8-inch tall card, I knew that my 6x6 papers weren't quite going to cut it today. I have in the past shown you how to stretch your papers, but I thought, right, let's have a look at the 8x8 paper pads. And I pulled out an old one from Crafter's Companion. I thought, I haven't used this in a very long time. Some of you may have this in your stash, but again, like I've said many times, it's not about necessarily having the same things that I've used. It's having a look what's in your stash, crafting your own stash. Do you have something similar? Maybe it's a similar colour palette. It might not be exactly the same product. But this was called Enchanted Forest, and this is what led me to the fairy design, because it was very much based around fairies, this collection, and it was a signature collection by Sarah Davies several years ago now. And I had a flick through, and a lot of these papers have got proper scenes on them. So if I just have a go through it like this, you can see, that it's got that, you can add the fairies in there. And I thought, that's not what I'm actually looking for. They are beautiful, but it's not what I was looking for my design. Really like the background on this one. And then when I kept going, I think there is one of them left. I came across, I may have used them both. Let's have a little look. I've got a scrap of it left, if not. Yeah, I came across this particular design, which is this one here on the front, and it's just an all-over print with that lovely bokeh technique incorporated into the paper. So this is where I started, and I grabbed my background, and that's what I wanted to work with. And I thought, right, where we're going to go from there then, Jan? So the next thing that I actually pulled out, having a look at this, was a metal die. Now, this particular collection, like I said, went with the fairies. So I thought, right, fair enough, we'll stick with that theme. And I actually pulled out a couple of my fairy dies that are from the same collection. They were from that Enchanted Forest collection. And then we needed a stamped image, which I'll come to later. My embellishment, now this could be absolutely anything, and again, there's so many different ways to interpret this. I've started off today with a pattern paper, but your background could be an inked background, it could be a watercolour wash, it could be an embossing folder, it might be a stamped background. There's so many different ways of incorporating a background into the card, but I've gone with the obvious today because I know lots of us have got reams of pattern papers in our stash. I know I have. I joke about having enough in my stash to go and decorate the whole house with 12 by 12 designs. Not that I'm planning it, but I've probably got enough. So yeah, let's get some of that pattern paper out today and have a go. Embellishments. Embellishments could be a piece of ribbon, it could be some twine, it could be using buttons, it could be adding some fabric to your design, so some felt maybe, it could be flowers. I chose today my embellishments to be my gems. You know how much I love my little gems, and I haven't put anything else on this card, so these fit the embellishment criteria. I've got a sentiment on there. Most of our projects have a sentiment, whether it's for a specific event or whether it's just a words of encouragement or just because card or anything like that. And I've gone for Make a Wish, which fit in again with this particular theme, and it's from that same collection. And then for finishing touches, I brought in my Spectrum Noir glitter pen. This is just a crystal clear glitter pen that applies glitter, and as always I've made an insert for the card. So this is my 5 elements, and then just a couple of finishing touches to get the design sorted. So let me bring in what I made for you guys and we'll start from there. Okay, so let's pop that bit to one side. And as I say, I've gone with a DL design, and this is what I came up with. So you can see that pattern paper in the background. I've used my metal dies and some scrap card to create the fairies. I added the little stamped image with the star clusters, which are from the a stamp set that the collection held along with the sentiment stamp. I've got those lovely Aurora gems. I just thought they were very sort of fantasy-like with that Aurora finish, and I don't know whether the camera's picking those up. And then my sentiment I've just stamped onto a piece of vellum just to add a little bit of interest. And a lot of you know, when I'm working on a vertical design, I like to cross it with something. This is where your embellishment could come in. I did think about ribbon to start off with. You know, you could put a piece of twine around here. Lots of different ways. It could be a border die that you add at the bottom. You know, lots of different ways of doing it. And then to finish off, again, I don't know whether the camera will pick it up. I've just added in the wings a little bit of my sparkle pen. I've just gone into the delicate sort of lacy part of the wings with the sparkle pen, just to add a touch of the glitter in there. And then I've got an insert ready to pop in this one towards the end of the video. So that's where I'm at, and I thought you guys might like to try this. You know, it's not necessarily something that I'm expecting everybody to join in with. It's just giving you a thought starter on those days that mojo sort of left us for a little while. I come in here sometimes and I sit down and I think, what shall I do today? What do I want to make? And you know, you get that little bit of brain fog where you're not quite sure what direction you want to go in. And often when I'm in that frame of mind, I end up making something that I'm not overly happy with. So this is just that starting point. And I'll throw some of the, I'm not going to do these on a regular basis, like my sketch challenge is a similar idea. And we do that at the beginning of each month. I'm just going to throw these in every now and again, and I will try and cover different things. So for example, we've used the pattern paper today. The next one I might do an ink background. I might throw in sort of some embossing in there and look at how we can alter this kind of thing as well. So pop that to one side and bring in some of the elements. So I've made my own DL card here. This is from a piece of smooth white cardstock, and it measures 8 inches tall by 8 inches wide, and I've scored it down the centre at 4 inches. So the DL stands for double length. So whatever your width of your card is, i.e. the 4, we're going to double it for the length, and it's as simple as that. And then I'm just going to fold this in half. Make sure that my edges meet nicely, and then we'll use the not the scoring tool, the burnishing tool there, just to pop a really nice crease in there. Make sure it's sealed into that cardstock. So we've got our double length. We've got 4 inches across by 8 inches in total. And then I've actually done a couple of matte layers today. So included in my background, I nearly always matte my card, and I very rarely just put the paper straight onto the card base. I normally use a matte layer. I've actually gone for a couple today. I just wanted to break up. I started out with the pink, which is this one, and this again is just from my collection of textured cardstock that I'd built up. And when I put the pattern paper on, there wasn't quite enough breaking up the two for my liking. So what I did was bring in a piece of silver mirror card, and we're going to pop that, and it's only a very, very tiny 1/16 of an inch border, but you can see how that just breaks up that detail a little bit and brings those two sort of together without deterring from what's going off. So just to go back a step, this one is cut to 7 3/4 by 3 3/4. So I've come down 1/4 of an inch. I don't want to leave too much border. Sometimes I leave a wider border on my cards, but because we're working with that narrow area, I didn't want to leave too much space and not have enough to work on. So just that little border, and I'm going to stick this piece down flat with my all-purpose glue. So it's getting ready for a refill. It's getting low, but I do have some in the cupboard. And this is always my chosen for popping cardstock to cardstock. Anything that's not a finished, got a coating on, I would nearly always go for the all-purpose glue. It doesn't ruffle the card. It just allows you to pop everything down nice and flat. And having the wet glue allows you to just manoeuvre it into place before you commit to adding that pressure there to pop it down. And then I'm going to pop that to one side. I usually put my block on it just so that everything dries flat. It's not really necessary. This is just supporting the OCD. You know what I'm like. Everything has to be right. And then we're going to come to those top 2 layers. Now, I'm not going to stick those onto the background yet because we're going to create the band of vellum that goes round here. So pop that to one side for a minute. And we are going to put these two together on here. And going back to what I've just said about the all-purpose glue, it's not particularly very friendly with anything shiny or anything that's coated. So if you use mirror card, you'll know that it is a white cardstock that is coated with that lovely mirror finish. Now, if this solvent base gets onto the shiny surface, it will dull it, it'll damage it, it'll interfere with it. So I tend not to use the all-purpose glue for that. So again, you could use your tape runner, you could use double-sided tape, which is what I've done on mine. So I've gone down to 7.5 by 3.5. So we've come down another 1/4 of an inch from the background that we've just created. And then I've staggered it to 7 3/8 by 3 3/8. So this is just 1/8 of an inch difference, so that we've got that really tiny, skinny silver border around the edge. It is literally just going to catch the light and separate that busy pattern paper from the plain matte layer that we've got behind it. And I've popped a couple of pieces of my double-sided tape, and this is just a Sticks 2 double-sided tape here that I use. I get most of my adhesive now from Sticks 2. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of the pieces off partially, and then I'm going to work on this side here and position it with the one that's still got the liner on, and then I can get this exactly where I want it to go, because it can be a bit grabby when you're using a tape like this. It sort of grabs the card and doesn't come away very well. Just pull that tape out, and I know now that I've got that perfectly in position, so automatically the rest of it is going to be in the right place. So then we can take away that second piece and have the confidence of knowing that that is exactly where you want it to be. We've got that lovely little border around the outside. And then I've got a piece of vellum, and this is just a scrap. I keep all the offcuts of my vellum in a little clear packet, so when I've cut into a sheet, I have sheets of A4, and just for those of you that are interested in that, I buy this online, and it's the Anita's plain white vellum pack. You get 10 sheets in there, A4 size, 120 GSM, and I love it. I've used it for years, and it's a case of if you found something that you like, why would you deviate from it? And I normally buy a couple of packs at this at a time, so I've got it on hand. And that's, I always keep a piece out to work with, and literally keep every scrap. This is all that's left now from cutting into this on repeated occasions, but even that bit will save just in case I want just a little skinny sentiment or anything like that. So yeah, don't throw any of it away. It's what I call my specialty cardstock. Now this is wider than what I wanted here. You can see this one, it is cut wider. There's about a couple of inches here that I cut off the piece that I had left, and I'm going to tear the edges once I've done the stamping. So we'll pop that one to one side. We will bring in our stamp positioner. And I'm going to do a little bit of heat embossing on here because I wanted it to be shiny, the finish on it. So I'm going to pop it in my stamp positioner, hold it in place with the magnet, and then I need to bring in my equipment for heat embossing. So first thing I'm going to do is use my little anti-static pad. Get plenty of that in here. And this is just to remove any static or any finger marks, particularly on the vellum. It's only a very lightweight medium. So that's that one done. I've got my clear embossing powder at the ready, and this is my sort of favourite combination for heat embossing. I prefer to stamp in a colour and put clear embossing powder over the top. So I've got this at the ready, good to go. Okay, we'll pop that to one side. And then I'm going to use grey. I thought the black, there was no black on the card today. I've got grey stamping here and grey cardstock. I thought I don't want to go black, it's very, very harsh. So I've used grey for my ink. So what I did was because we need a pigment ink to attract the powder. So there's a couple of ways of doing this. If you've got a really dark grey ink, you could stamp in the grey and then overlay it with a clear ink. But I've used a couple of grey inks. So I've just got an ordinary stamping ink in grey, and then I've got one of my opaque pigments which take a little bit longer to dry, and these are both Spectrum Noir, and then this one will attract the embossing powder. So what I'm going to do is I've got my stamping position from when I stamped it before, and these are from sets again from that Enchanted Forest collection. So let me just take those apart because there's a couple of sets there. So this one has got that lovely Make-A-Wish. There are some silhouette fairies in here as well, but I just wanted that Make-A-Wish out of here for this one. So that's what we're going to use to do our sentiment. So I've got that in my positioner, and first of all I'm going to give it a couple of layers of the plain grey ink just to build up some depth of colour with it being on the vellum. Okay, so we're going to go once and give that a press down. And then I'm going to add another layer of that just to build up the depth of that grey, the saturation of the grey, like so. And get that one pressed down. Now this one will dry too fast for me to put the embossing powder straight on top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in that pigment ink now, which is a similar shade, and I'm going to go over the top, and I only need to do this once. But because it's got pigment ink in it, it sits on the surface of the either the paper, the cardstock, the vellum, and it will sit there long enough for me to then add the embossing powder over the top without having to worry about it drying. So we'll just make sure that ink's transferred, and then I'm going to take this out carefully without touching the embossing. I'll come back to that later, and then bring my embossing ink back in and just very carefully add that all over the grey ink. Okay, so we'll give it a little tap, and you can see now it's sort of gone opaque. So the next thing I'm going to do is pop the lid back on here so that we don't have any accidents. And I'm speaking from experience where this has gone all over the place, or the heat tool started melting what was left in the box. And then I'm going to bring my heat tool in, and I'm going to get this up to temperature. Vellum is a very, very sort of lightweight medium, so the longer the heat's on it, the more paper warps. So get this as hot as you can get it, and this should go really quickly. So all I'm going to do is aim this and move. Normally I would say stay in one place, but I'm going to keep moving it here to prevent the warp until it starts to go glossy. And literally, that's it. It's done. I can see now, and if I can just get this up to the camera, you can see that we've got that lovely glossy finish on there now. And I'm going to pop that to one side just to let that dry for a second or two. I don't want to mess with it while the embossing powder's still tacky. So while I'm just waiting for that to dry, I am going to bring in those lovely dies. And I've cut these out, and I was a bit like, where do I want to go with this? Because normally, silhouettes I would normally do in black. And I thought it's too harsh for this lovely soft ethereal background that we'd created. So I didn't want to go with the black. So it was like pulling colours out of what was already there. Tried the teal, and that was running too much interference for my liking. So I pulled out a little bit of the purple, which it's got in the paper. And then I pulled out the grey, which is what the background colour is, where all that grey came from. And I have cut one of each out of some scrap card. And this one is, she's reaching up here. Obviously the dies are reversed, and then a piece of the purple, and they're what we're going to use for our our stamp metal die images. So if you remember, the number 2 on our list was to use some metal die. So I've chosen the 2 fairies. It could be more than one metal die. You know, you might have 2 different things that you want to put on there. It could be a cover plate die or a background die. It could be the flowers that you create the die with, which then become your embellishments. So again, as I say, just that thought starter, but I've gone with the fairies for that metal die element. So we'll pop those over to one side. We've got these at the ready, and we're going to have them sort of like this, as if she's looking up here and reaching up to the one that's hovering over the top. And then just before we actually put anything else on here, once we've got that vellum on, we're going to add the little stamped images, and they're from a partner stamp set in here. And these are all from that Enchanted Forest collection, if you have it. I did think about using the branch, but changed my mind because there were some branches in the background of the pattern paper. But all I've done is just taken that little stamp image here, and we're going to put some of those on the design as well. So I've got all those bits and pieces at the ready. So the first thing I want to do, so that I can get the correct positioning, is actually pop this around the bottom. So number 1, I'm just going to give it a very, very light buff with my cloth to get rid of any of that residue anti-static powder. And then I want to tear the edges. So I've purposely cut this wider than what I want. And I'm going to take about 1/4 inch off each side, and I love tearing the vellum. It just adds to that sort of ethereal finish. It gives a lovely effect. I very rarely use vellum without tearing the edges, and it just exposes tiny bit of that white that's inside the core of the vellum. And then I'm going to turn it round, and I'm going to do the same at this side. So again, about 1/4 inch. I hold my thumb that I'm not using to tear against it, so that I don't go too wild with the tearing and, you know, get a piece that I'm not wanting. And I tend to go wobbly rather than trying to do a straight line, because then it looks as if it's meant to be that way rather than, you know, it wasn't quite straight. Jan, what were you thinking? And then this one is going to go across the bottom. I'm just going to leave a little bit here, about 1/2 inch at the bottom. And then I want to wrap that around one side, turn it over, and I'm just going to use my tape runner here to add some adhesive and seal that in place. And then once we're happy with that one, we can make sure it pulls across really nicely. Fold the other side round, add some adhesive, and then get that one secured in place. So we've got that one at the ready. Okay, so now that I've got that on there, I can position the rest of the items, because I wanted her to just dip slightly onto that vellum. So we're going to put the grey one at the bottom looking up, and we're going to have this one further up at the top, sort of looking down like so. And I'm just going to pop those on with a little bit of my embellishment glue. So you know, you could have run these through your Xyron sticker maker if you have one. You could put double-sided adhesive on the back, but I am just going to pop. It tends to be my sort of go-to with the embellishment glue, just a few little dots in sort of secure places so that I know it's stuck down. It doesn't need a massive amount of glue there. So just little dots all the way around it until we've got sufficient to hold it in place. I often sort of use the cloth to just tap off any excess so that it doesn't squidge out. And then with her in place, we know roughly where we want this one up at the top here. So I'm just going to tilt her slightly like so. Bring in that wax paper so that I can add some pressure and get her stuck down. And then we're going to repeat that with the grey one. So again, just adding a few dots of that embellishment glue in strategic places so that we know that all the edges are stuck down and it's not going to get caught or damaged. Doesn't need much on there at all. And then again, just tap off, if you've got a bit heavy-handed with it, any of the excess, and then she's going to come into that area about there. And again, use that paper over the top. It's just a piece of wax paper to add the pressure, and that will actually catch any element of the glue if any of it does pop out of the side. And now I've got those in place, I can add my little stars. Now, when I was doing the heat embossing, I used the Spectrum Noir ink in anthracite, but this was the pigment ink, and it's not quite as saturated in colour, but I do have the quick dry inks from the same range in the same colour. So A, this is much more saturated in colour, and B, it dries so quickly. So I'm going to ink up my stars there, and I've just got these on a block because they're just a couple of we're going to go sort of free stamping with this one, and I wanted to pop some in this top corner here. And when you're stamping with anything like that, just give it time for that ink to transfer, because the paper will soak that ink in. And we've got that first impression, and then I'm going to do this again, and I'm going to turn it round this time, and I'm going to come up from that bottom edge this time. So we're going to go straight through that background paper print. Give that ink chance to transfer, and we've got our second impression there. And then they just get treated to a little bit of a clean. The cloth comes in handy for all sorts of things. I use it for pretty much everything, and then it goes in the washing machine every so often. So you can see now that we've got our design almost there. So the background card should be ready. Put that one away, and we're going to lay this over the top of here now. Okay, so choices with this, you know, you can I added a little bit of foam tape on this one. You know, it was only 1mm, so it's barely raised, but it is just raised from the background card. But again, I talk about this quite often in videos as to whether you are mailing a card that you've made or whether you're hand delivering it. So I'm going to leave this one flat just so that we can have a comparison. It's going to look very, very similar. And because I've got a plain cardstock and a plain cardstock, excuse me, still battling this cold that I've had, it will not leave. I don't know what's going off. But I'm going to use that on the back of here again now. And just lay this one in the middle there with that slightly wider border than the silver. So we've got those offset borders again, which are tend to be a feature in my designs. I very rarely do even all the way through with the borders. and then hold that one in place, and I'm just going to pop that block back on it again just for a minute while we go through our little list. Okay, so we use the pattern paper in the background from that paper pad. We die cut the fairies out of some scrap card to add to the design. I use the little stamp with the star cluster on for my stamped image here. On the finished sample, I use those lovely little Aurora gems, and again just that cluster of 5, drawing your eye through the sentiment there on the card. And then we actually use that Make-A-Wish stamp with the heat embossing. It's nice, just gives it a bit of texture when you feel it here. It's just slightly raised and a little bit shiny, and we've got that on as our 5th element. Okay, so I'm going to revert back to this one because I've got the insert ready to put in this one. So for finishing touches, I just took my glitter pen, and this is a Spectrum Noir crystal glitter pen. It doesn't have any pigment in it, there's no colour in it, it is just the beautiful glitter suspended in water. And all I did was just go straight onto the card and pop this in the gap. Now if it's not running properly, you just have to give these a little squeeze, these pens, until that ink starts to pop through the valve. There we go. And then once it's running like that, it's usually much easier to see, yeah, the sparkle. So just inside those lovely lacy wings, I went over the die cut as well. I wasn't even going to try and get this just inside. I've just added that little bit of sparkle as an extra finishing touch. Because let's face it, you know, there's no fairies without sparkle. It appeals to that magpie in me again. I love a little bit of shine or sparkle on the rest of the card. So yeah, just literally filling in here. And I've already done this on this card, so I'm just sort of adding a bit in here just to show you how I did it. Really simple, like so. So that's my finishing touches. And then the last thing was to add a sentiment, to add an insert. And I have actually prepared the insert because I wanted to work on this side of it here today. But I know a lot of you like to see how I've done the inserts when I put them in the cards. So I've taken a piece that measures, I think this was the same size as the silver layer. Yeah, 7.5 by 3.5. Of plain white cardstock again. So this is the same cardstock that was used. This was cut from the piece of A4 that was left over from my background card base. And then when I turn it over, let's pop this to one side for a second. Couple of things. The first thing I did was go round it with some pale pink ink, and I think I just used my sponge sugar distressing with the applicator and went round and brought that sort of into the card so that it being pure white, because the white on white doesn't show up. Invariably I don't put a matte layer underneath. I do occasionally, but most of the time I just use the piece of white card. So in order for it to stand out against the background of the card base, pop the pink ink round, and then I just used the grey again, the pigment one, and literally just touched the edge of it to bring that grey round the edge. And you'll see when we place that over the card blank how it lifts it from the card. And then this particular stamp was in the same set as the star cluster that we used, and it says may your day be filled with sparkle, which I thought was perfect for what we'd created. I've used that same little star cluster in the pink again, just as a nod to the colours on the outside. And then tiny little scraps that were left where I've cut down, you know, elements of the background paper, the matte layer, the silver. I've just done 3 little tiny pieces here, just as a nod to what's going on the outside of the card there. And then all we're going to do is pop this on the inside, and you can see how that inking just allows it to stand up from that background card. So again, cardstock to cardstock, we've got that lovely all-purpose glue, and I really need to get this one filled up. It's getting low, this particular one. I have a larger bottle in the cupboard that I just fill the smaller one up with because I find it's easier to use, it's easier to handle. And then again, drop that down and just maneuver it into the right position. And then once you're happy, I always keep one hand on it and then use the other one to press it down. And this was the same grey ink. I stamped in the grey ink that we used originally to stamp on the vellum before I added the pigment layer, so that everything ties in together rather than adding. There was no black involved this time, so I didn't want to put black inside it and suddenly be, oh, just a second, what's going off? So yeah, got that one in there. So that's my design there for today. Really, really pretty. Would fit in a DL envelope. And just going with that Take 5 challenge. So again, the background was the pattern paper. The metal die were the two fairies as a die cut. The stamped images were adding the stars in there, which went with the fairies. The embellishments were the lovely Aurora gems. Sentiment Make-A-Wish. And then I finished it off with that glitter pen in the wings there. And then now we've got our insert inside. So really, really pretty, really delicate. This would make a lovely card, I think, for maybe a teenage girl, something like that. You could even incorporate a number onto here if you wanted to. If you've got some very small numbers, you could put one on each. You know, if it was a double-digit number, you could maybe put one on each of the fairies. You could have added the number at the bottom here instead of the gems. So yeah, lots of different ways around it. But that's my design for today, for that Take 5 challenge. And as I say, I'm not going to do this, you know, every single time. It's just, I'm just going to throw one in every now and again, just sort of to get those thought processes working, get those creative ideas flowing. And, you know, it might just come in handy on those days where you're not quite sure what to do. You know, in this case, it was the pattern paper that led me to this kind of, you know, design with the fairies. For example, if I had have picked, let's have a look, what else have we got up here? Just something random. If I'd have gone with something like this, which is a much more sort of rustic finish. I've literally just grabbed one off my shelf. And this is one that I've had for a quite while. Craft Sensations. I'm not sure if that's not Hobbycraft here in the UK that produce these. But this has got much more sort of textured designs in, what with the wood grain, etc. So if I'd have picked this one, I probably would have ended up, you know, going for something like the wood grain and maybe going down a more of a masculine feel with it. So yeah, quite often the paper can be the thought starter for your design. And that's where I went with this one, along that fairy design. Very, very pretty, very delicate, and fill in those 5 simple areas, things that we have in our stash. You know, most of us have got the metal dies, most of us have got stamps. Embellishments can come in any shape or form. We nearly always put a sentiment on a project, and finishing touches can be whatever you wish. You know, it may be that you want to make an envelope for it. You may want to make a box to put it in. Your finishing touches might be adding extra embellishments if that's where you want to go with it. So yeah, don't be just restricted to this. Use it to your advantage and take it wherever you want it to go. So I hope you've enjoyed that, something a little bit different for the new year. And I will be back very soon with another tutorial for you. But for now, enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll be back very, very soon. Bye-bye now.